Robert, everything is the way that the left does it, the way that the evil powers do it, everything is on its head all the time. So even these arguments about Hamas Israel and it just everything is just so distorted. You just for me it's very clear. All you have to do is look at what Hamas stands for, what Hamas says. For instance, that they're going to do and perpetrate another million October 7th till all eternity. They're very clear on this. And just in terms of what they perpetrated, in terms of what they did, we don't need to get into perhaps all the details here. People hopefully know and follow it, but the raping, the killing of the children, the burning of the children, the beheadings, what they're doing to the hostages today. It's not hard if you have any kind of moral clarity to know who's evil and not evil in this conflict. It's just so simple. But yet, these arguments. So, just interested in a lot of these arguments that how many children the Israelis are killing in Gaza. So, to begin with, our heart bleeds as Israel's heart bleeds for all people that die, including the children of Gaza. We know that the Israelis are this is the most moral army in the world in terms of fighting terrorism. The deaths that are caused, this is all inadvertent. It's not deliberate. And I'm also very interested in the numbers that the enemy creates. Also, what is considered a child in that culture, because as some experts have shown, they consider anybody under a certain age a child. So it's very interesting how they play with the numbers. They say that anybody under 18, they immediately say is a child. But a lot of other things that I've been thinking of here. If we use this kind of thinking in the Second World War, when we're trying to fight an evil entity, if we start counting numbers in terms of, oh, if one side starts, more people are dying on one side, then that means the other side has to stop. So if we were fighting against Hitler during the Second World War, and we're starting to count the numbers of how many innocent people on the German side are dying, would we have been able to defeat Hitler? Would we have even defeated Japan with the dropping of the nuclear bombs that ended that war? These arguments are very flawed coming from the unholy alliance, aren't they?
Yeah, but it's remarkable how people have not thought these things through.
Mm.
It seems as if the repetition of this theme
Yeah.
has been very effective, and actually the repetition of it is an indication of how powerful it is. That you see all the time in CNN and the New York Times and so on. 50 Palestinians were killed and 3 Israelis, or something like that. And
Right.
this is so the idea that the Israelis are in the wrong, whereas many more Germans were killed in World War II than Americans. And so that standard, Nazi Germany should have won World War II,
Right.
or was in moral high ground
Yeah.
for World. Nobody ever takes into account the fact that Hamas is deliberately trying, and has for years, deliberately tried to increase the number of civilian casualties because it understands their value for propaganda purposes. It launches attacks from civilian areas precisely so as to draw retaliatory fire that it can use for that propaganda. And that the Israelis, as you noted, take great pains to avoid civilian casualties, but sometimes this is not possible to do. The 17-year-old kid with a Kalashnikov is killed, and he's classified as is the Israelis killed a child, but also they just outright lie. And I wrote an article not long ago looking at the UN figures, and I was not the first to do this. It was an article actually about one of the reporters who had noticed this, but you can still see it, as far as I know, on the UN website, that they've got a daily tally of the number of Palestinians killed and the number of women and children. And this reporter went through and actually started to compare the numbers from day to day, and he saw all kinds of chicanery. Like, for example, on one day, from one day to the next, and I checked this myself, there were like 300 more casualties in the total number. But then if you looked at the number of children, it had jumped by 600. And so 300 people were killed, including 600 children. And that's the kind of thing that actually came out of the Hamas Gaza Ministry of Health and is repeated uncritically by the United Nations, with nobody either noticing or caring that the numbers don't even make sense on the face of it.
Absolutely, Robert. And also, just in terms of just the logic of looking at numbers, there's one side that is good and there's another side that is evil. And the side of good has to win in a war. And regrettably, a lot of people die in war. And it's incredible, too, that in this particular conflict, Hamas and the Islamic jihadists, they understand that Israel doesn't want to kill innocent people. And so Hamas puts civilians and children in the way to cause more deaths on their own side. It's really interesting that so many people can't see this, right?
Yeah, it's incredible to me. I've had people that I respected, people that I was friends with,
Yeah.
who I hard for after October 7th show me a side that shocks me, and it shows me the power of the propaganda. This is one of the reasons why the propaganda keeps being pumped out. It is effective.
Yeah.
The big works. The big
Yeah.
lie is something that Goebbels spoke about, that we see the left using all the time nowadays,
Yeah.
that you tell a lie, but you don't just tell a lie once, you have to keep on repeating it. And they repeat it so often that now I have people that I thought had sense who they started talking to me after October 7th about the Israeli occupation when there is no occupation,
Yeah.
and out the civilian casualties in the way that you were discussing before. And when I actually said, in wartime, these kinds of things can be unavoidable, and look at the firebombing of Dresden or look at the nuclear bombs in Japan. And this guy actually said, well, those things were terrible. That's exactly what I'm talking about. They shouldn't have been done. And they don't stop and think, if there had not been the nuclear bombs in Japan, then there would have had to have been a ground invasion that would have killed many more people than the nuclear bombs did. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with Dresden, that if you don't do something like that, then you're going to have to go slower, and that's going to end up with more people killed.
Yeah.
And so I asked this man who had been a friend, what would you do? What would you do? He said, I would stop. If there are, I don't care if Hamas is using human shields. They're humans. They're civilians. You can't kill them. So if I was the Israelis, I would stop. And so I said, so you would allow Israeli civilians to be killed
Mm.
by Hamas because Hamas is putting civilians in the way of getting killed itself. And that then of course that was the end of the discussion. But
Yeah.
it seems as if people are just accepting this propaganda without thinking it through at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I studied Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombings, for many, many years. If those bombings did not occur or were not done, landed invasion would have had to happen. And conservative estimates are even 1 million, 2 million Japanese would have died, hundreds of thousands of American soldiers, and the Japanese were going to kill all the American POWs. It just, you can imagine the consequences there, but people like to blame a certain side for everything.